All right, class, let's get going with our boards here for the last set for the modern era. Our essential question: how did nationalism and imperialism influence the world? So during this time, European imperialism in Africa, pre-1800s, other than North Africa, Africa was not sought after as a colonial possession. Things began to change in Africa. The slave trade stopped by early 1820s. Early 1600s, the Dutch had settled down in South Africa, set up ranches and farms. In the early 1800s, the British began to push the Dutch or the Boers north, and that instigated the Boer Wars, which was the Boers or the Dutch people that had lived in South Africa for quite a long time, versus the British, which eventually the British took over South Africa, which was known for its gold and diamonds, and still is to the day. So some of the some more reasons why the Europeans were very involved in Africa was in Egypt, the Suez Canal. The French began to build it, and the British eventually took it over. So Napoleon in the early 1800s tried to take Egypt, but it remained under Ottoman control. Ottoman began to westernize Egypt. Egypt, with the help of France, began to build the Suez Canal to connect the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, the Med to the Red. France built it, but had many monetary problems, and the British bought out shares of the Suez Canal, and eventually led to Egypt become a British colony in 1882. Now, shortly after that, the Berlin Conference took place in 1884. Otto von Bismarck, who was the Prime Minister of newly formed Prussia and Germany, hosted the conference to divide up Africa. No African countries were invited to this Berlin Conference. The entire continent is divided up except for Liberia and Ethiopia. Many tribal lands were divided, which led to, and still to this day, leads to many disputes. Just in the last couple of years, we've had the Sudan divided up between North Sudan and South Sudan. That was all dates back to this European Berlin Conference. Okay, the unification of Italy and Germany in 1849. In Italy, King Emmanuel II of Sardinia and Count Cavour began to unify Italy. Now, this is a difficult process because Italy was divided up between many kingdoms and people didn't want to give up their power. Giuseppe Garibaldi raises an army and begins to force smaller states in Italy to the unification table. In 1870s, the northern parts of Italy are annexed, and Italy becomes a country when Rome becomes the capital. So Rome was one of the last to hold out, and that's because the Pope didn't want to give up his power that he controlled in Rome. Now in Germany in 1861, Prussia begins to dominate the German states. Prussia was a very powerful state in the northern part of Germany. Otto von Bismarck becomes prime minister, and he leads with an iron fist. Bismarck leads wars with Austria and France, defeating both, and he was pretty hardcore with his army. In 1871, King William I was crowned Emperor of newly formed Germany. So Germany was one of the last countries that were formed, not like France, Spain, England. They had all been there for quite a long time. In 1888, William II industrializes the country and dramatically increases the military, which leads us up to World War I, which is our next unit. All right, make an adjustment there to the boards. All right, other political developments. Russia. Russia begins to industrialize as well, but is much slower than the rest of Europe, and this takes quite a long time for poor little Russia, or should I say poor big Russia. Alexander II issues the Emancipation Edict of the Serfs in 1860-61, which freed 20 million serfs that were essentially slaves tied to the land. So then people were free to move to the cities, and this helped industrialization as well. Alexander II was assassinated in 1881. Alexander III takes over and forced all of those in Russia to learn Russian, harsh treatment of those who disobeyed. So at this point, in 1881, They were really trying to unify Russia. There was like a Russification going on where people had to, undertake the styles and cultural habits of Russia to be considered Russian, or you got sent to Siberia and you had to work in some slave labor camp. All right, workers in Russia's farms and cities in the Industrial Revolution was taking place there, fought hard for rights, but had very little rights, and the middle class was somewhat small. And this would all lead up to, in a few years, the Russian Revolution and the communist formation in Russia. Now, the Ottoman Empire, by the 1800s, the Ottoman Empire had shrunk, and surrounding empires such as Russia grew. So the Ottoman Empire began to decline, and those around them just simply took their land. The Crimean War, fought in 1853 to limit Russia's advances within the Black Sea area with the help of the Brits and the French. It was really to no avail. So the British were fighting there, the French were fighting there on the fight of the Ottoman Empire. They were fighting against Russian expansion, but neither team really won. And this was the first real war where they used old-style military tactics with new weapons. This was fought right before our Civil War, and there was mass casualties during this Crimean War, which was not good. All right. Also, preeminent, formidable, good old USA began to enforce its own imperialism. President Monroe issued the Monroe Doctrine in 1823, saying all European powers stay out of the Western Hemisphere. The Spanish had been there for quite a while, but the Monroe Doctrine even threatened the Spanish, you got to get out of here too. In 1898, the Spanish-American War took place. The U.S. defeats Spain pretty handedly and takes Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and a number of other islands. This gave dominance to the United States in the Western Hemisphere. Latin American countries are heavily influenced by capitalistic United States of America, and not always in a good way. The Panama Canal is finished with the help of the United States in 1914, which would dramatically increase trade from the Atlantic to the Pacific, since you didn't have to go all the way around South America. All right, remember, history's no mystery. Take good notes.